Welcome to the Springtime program brought to you by UCLA Women in Philanthropy. Our program today highlights research on the importance and impact of kindness by accomplished UCLA experts. From the Bedari Kindness Institute at UCLA, they will address, is kindness contagious? I am Susan Rice, President of Women in Philanthropy. Women in Philanthropy at UCLA celebrates and inspires women's giving across the UCLA campus. We foster women's participation giving with volunteer leadership positions. And since the beginning, our extraordinary women leaders have served UCLA on departmental advisory councils, task forces, student mentoring, scholarship advisories, on the University of California Board of Regents and the UCLA Foundation Board. In 2019, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. I am proud to say that we now are 3,000 women members strong. All contribute time, talent, and treasure to every corner of the university. To engage the UCLA community, we hold events throughout the year that showcase different areas or topics across campus. This year, we brought programs through webinars and have been delighted at the enormous and enthusiastic response from our members and guests. We have found that this way of bringing intellectual and emotional nourishment to you has broadened appreciation of UCLA. As with our previous presentations, today's discussion should be very enlightening, inspirational, and educational. So let us begin. The Bedari Kindness Institute was launched in 2019 to provide an interdisciplinary platform dedicated to research, education, and practice. Its goal is to empower citizens and leaders to invest in building more humane societies. It is the world's first interdisciplinary research institute on kindness. As is appropriate at a research university, such as UCLA, the Badari Kindness Institute focuses on research. The multidisciplinary research explores the actions, thoughts, feelings, and social institutions associated with kindness. The researchers come from numerous disciplines at UCLA and from external organizations. The Institute's mission is not only to engage in best-in-class research, but to turn that learning into real-world practices through partnerships that are local, national, and global. Among the studies taking place, researchers are exploring whether just witnessing an act of kindness, even between strangers, make us feel better about our world and make us more inclined to perform an act of kindness ourselves? Does mindfulness make us healthier? Are social relationships necessary for mental and physical health? Today's panel of experts from the UCLA Bedari Kindness Institute will discuss some current research that can have positive effects that can spread among individuals and groups. Our moderator is Stacy Freeman. Stacy is the executive director of the Bedari Kindness Institute. She is a university administrator, educational researcher, and public outreach expert. Her PhD is in educational policy and evaluation with a research focus on education, access, and equity issues for Black students. Since 2005, she has developed local, regional, national, and international university outreach programs across multiple disciplines, including STEM, nonprofit leadership, and management and sustainability. After the presentation, there will be time for us to hear responses to the questions from the panelists. So please submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. They will be reviewed and consolidated by staff, and our moderator, Stacy Freeman, will present them for a response. Stacy.
Thank you so much, Susan, for the wonderful introduction. We're so pleased to have our knowledgeable faculty members and our colleagues of mine here today with us to share more information about their research on kindness. I'm going to start by introducing each of the panelists. Then we are going to receive an overview of the Bedari Kindness Institute by Dan Fessler, who's the director of the Institute. And this will be followed by each panelist giving a short presentation of their research, and then I will ask some questions. As Susan said, you are also welcome to submit questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of most of the screens, and we'll try our best to get to as many questions as possible. So let's meet the panelists. First is Karen Umamoto. She is the Helen and Morgan Chu Chair and Director of the Asian American Studies Center. She is also a professor in the Departments of Urban Planning and Asian American Studies. She is an urban planner and Asian American urban historian who is concerned about how we can all live together as an inclusive, respectful, and egalitarian multicultural society. Naomi Eisenberger is a professor in the Department of Psychology. She is a social neuroscientist interested in why social relationships are so critical for mental and physical health. Next is Julianne Bauer. She's a professor in the Departments of Psychology and Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She is a health psychologist who studies mind-body interactions and how they can be leveraged to promote health and well-being. And finally, Dan Fessler is the director of the Bedari Kindness Institute and a professor in the Department of Anthropology. He is an evolutionary anthropologist whose principal focus is contemporary humans. Now Dan will give an overview of the Institute.
Thanks, Stacy and Susan, and thank you all members of the audience for joining us today to discuss, I think, perhaps one of the most important topics of our time, and that is kindness and how we can promote it. Clearly today, it is in shorter supply than we would like. So let me begin by giving you all a brief overview of the history and composition of the Bedari Kindness Institute. And then I'm going to transition into a discussion of some of the work that I and my immediate colleagues have done. And then we'll hear from some of the other panelists about their own work. So as Susan mentioned, the Bedari Kindness Institute was established just recently in 2019 with a generous $20 million pledge from UCLA alumnus Matt Harris. And we have a three-pronged mandate. We are focused on conducting basic research into the factors that promote or inhibit kindness. And as you'll hear in part in our discussions today, the Institute focuses at a wide variety of scales, ranging from those of the individual to the community to whole societies and even international relations. And really importantly here, consistent with UCLA's outstanding reputation as one of the world's leaders in conducting important scholarship and scientific research, the foundation of our institute is rigorous scholarship. Sometimes when people hear the notion of kindness as a focus of study, they envision some kind of less than rigorous approach. A sort of kumbaya, happy, somewhat fluffy, if you will, approach to the topic. And that's not at all consistent with UCLA's standing in the world or that of our esteemed faculty. Instead, we view kindness as just another important facet of humanity and one that is subject to rigorous investigation. So really the bedrock of our organization is exploring the things that promote or inhibit kindness in this rigorous fashion. A second prong of our mandate is translational application of research findings in order to make the world a better place. And our goal is to promote evidence-based practices that can enhance kindness in individual lives, in communities, and at social policy levels. And finally, again, consistent with UCLA's outstanding status in the world, education is the third prong of our organization. We have a variety of educational initiatives already in place, despite the fact that we are a relatively young organization. And just to familiarize you with some of those very briefly before describing our membership, so far, the Institute has sponsored more than 30 of the Fiat Lux undergraduate seminars, which are targeted primarily, but not exclusively, at freshmen. They provide an excellent opportunity for freshmen to get to know faculty. A really challenging feature of a very large university is limited student-faculty interaction. And through these classes, about 600 undergraduates have had the opportunity to learn from faculty on a wide variety of subjects related to kindness. And just this spring quarter, I'm very pleased to say, 2 of our Bedari Kindness Institute faculty members are leading the very first course exclusively developed within our institute and dedicated to the interdisciplinary study of kindness, with lectures from many, many of our faculty members. So far, the feedback that I'm getting from the students is incredibly enthusiastic. They're finding this eye-opening, enlightening, and potentially life-changing. And then our organization also focuses on outreach in terms of sharing information with the community. We do this through media. We do it through initiatives that combine translational application and education. So, for example, we are a co-sponsor of the Just Say Hello initiative that was recently launched here in Los Angeles in partnership with our crosstown rival USC and a number of other organizations, where the goal is to try and reduce racial prejudice through encouraging people to say hello to others in public contexts in order to establish connections with people whom they might otherwise not meet. So, as you know, a key feature of UCLA as a campus is that really all of the different fields are represented in one geographic location, and this enhances our ability to promote interdisciplinary collaboration, which is really a key feature of the Bedari Kindness Institute. I won't go through the long list of the many departments that our 34 faculty members in the Institute belong to, but just to give you some examples, in addition to those that are represented by my colleagues here today, we have colleagues from history, geriatrics, marketing, epidemiology, economics, political science, Chicano studies, and so on, really spanning the entire university. We've supported to date 11 faculty research projects on everything from treating mental illness to reducing weight-based stigma, promoting kind and compassionate care in long-term care facilities, and training physicians in handling challenging patient interactions. So again, a broad range of topics consistent with our incredible faculty. And we've supported 19 graduate fellowships thus far, exploring a wide variety of topics from meat avoidance to the neurobehavioral development of prosocial behavior. So with that overview as a starting point, I'd like to briefly describe for you some of my own research and address the theme of today's discussion, which is kindness contagious? So several hundred years ago, Thomas Jefferson first coined the term elevation to describe the emotional experience that people have when they learn about remarkable moral behavior, in particular altruistic behavior. And you can pause and think for yourself about how you feel, that is, what the emotions that you feel are when you witness an act of remarkable kindness. Over the last 20 years, psychologists have become, and anthropologists have become interested in this notion that Jefferson first described, that is the unique emotional experience, which is now termed elevation. And about 10 years ago, my colleagues and I first demonstrated that simply witnessing through a video that's a few minutes long, witnessing remarkable altruism causes people to have a very distinct emotional experience marked by particular somatic experiences, tears in the eyes, a lump in the throat, and particular motivational dispositions after that. Over the last 5 years, my colleagues and I have been conducting research on the UCLA campus, online with participants throughout the United States, and on the streets of Los Angeles. And we've studied in about 17 different experiments, a total of something like 8,000 plus participants, the results of which reveal that witnessing as a third-party witness, that is, as an observer on an event, witnessing remarkable acts of kindness, inspires people with this particular emotional constellation that I've described, and it actually changes their behavior. That is, they become more altruistic. In the experiments that we conducted on the streets of LA, we paid participants for their time, and then we gave them the opportunity to make anonymous donations in such a way that we wouldn't know what the individual was doing. Those donations went to the UCLA Children's Hospital. And in fact, when we first started collecting these data, one of my undergraduate research assistants came to me and said, "Professor Fessler, we have a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" She said, "Well, there's something wrong with our accounting because some of the numbers that we're getting are more than the payment that we're providing." I said, "That's not a problem. That's evidence. What we have there is an indication that people are so inspired that they're opening their wallets to provide more money in their donations than we have actually given them." What is leading to this experience? Simple, 2 minutes of witnessing altruistic behavior by an unknown stranger. In fact, the UCLA Health Organization believes that my postdoc is a generous donor because he's been writing checks to the Children's Hospital. That's not his money, that's the money that our participants have been giving back. Does everybody have this experience? No, in fact, everybody does not. And we can predict who will have the experience and who will not on the basis of a very simple, short questionnaire. That questionnaire explores whether people walk into the situation expecting others to be cooperative or whether people are more cynical and expect others to be self-interested. In particular, those who expect others to be more cooperative are more likely to have this uplifting emotional experience and more likely to become more pro-social themselves as a consequence. We can understand this in terms of people's expectations framing their interpretation of events. The idealistic person sees this as an opportunity to participate in a community of pro-social actors. The more cynical person sees this potentially as someone being taken advantage of or someone seeking to take advantage of others. And therefore, that person doesn't have this uplifting emotional experience that the idealist has. Now, where do those expectations come from? They come from prior emotional experiences like this. So what this tells us is that there can be upward spirals of positive experience. As we witness more prosociality, we become more idealistic about others. And there can also be downward spirals. As we witness more exploitation, we become more cynical about others. In turn, our own actions can influence others because, of course, our own actions are information that is affecting other people's expectations and their experiences as well. So what this all tells us is that in designing more humane, compassionate, and kind communities, we need to promote, each of us as individual actors, we need to promote the spread of contagious kindness and the increase of idealism. And we need to think about the practices and institutions that pose barriers to those kinds of experiences and that kind of information, including, I should say, our information diet, that is what we consume in the media, that leads to a coloring of our expectations of others as positive or negative actors in the world. This is, I think, very exciting research that has a great potential to shape both the choices that we make in our own lives and the way that we interact with others. So with that, I'm going to conclude discussing my own research, and I'd like to turn now to our colleague Julie Bauer, who's going to describe some of her own work in this area.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here and participating in this panel. It's fascinating to hear about the work that Dan's doing. So my interest in kindness actually comes from a broader program of research on mindfulness. So as many of you may already be aware, mindfulness can be defined as paying attention to present moment experiences with openness and curiosity without judgment. So that turns out to be a critical part of the definition that I'll get back to. So mindfulness interventions have been shown to reduce stress and depression, And we've been working with the Mindful Awareness Research Center here at UCLA to see if mindfulness can be helpful for young women with breast cancer. So women who are diagnosed with premenopausal breast cancer experience high levels of stress, depression, and other symptoms. They're also at risk for shorter survival. So we have a whole program of work trying to understand the experiences of these women and identify strategies to help them. So we've shown that a 6-week mindfulness intervention developed here at UCLA has beneficial effects on depression and on immune function in this group. And we are particularly interested in how mindfulness does this. What are women learning from this intervention that leads to beneficial effects on depression, as well as beneficial effects on the body? So here's where we get to the kindness piece. We have found that one of the critical components here was self-kindness. Women were learning to be more kind and compassionate to themselves, which led to decreases in depression and lower levels of inflammation. They also reported feeling happier with a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in life. So being open to and accepting of one's thoughts and feelings is actually one of the core elements of mindfulness. It's embedded in the practice and it's cultivated throughout the practice. So rather than our more typical patterns of judging ourselves, which for many of us lead to finding ourselves lacking, mindfulness encourages us to be more open to our thoughts and feelings, to be curious about them, and ultimately more accepting of them and thus of ourselves. So the mindfulness intervention also includes specific exercises which are designed to develop this kindness muscle. And these actually work by sending loving kindness to other people. So you may be asked to envision a beloved friend, a close family member, even a pet, and consider that person or animal with statements like, may you be happy and joyful, may you be safe and protected. This cultivates an attitude of kindness toward these beloved others in the environment. Now, interestingly, these exercises typically end by sending kindness to yourself, which turns out to be the hardest part. We are pretty good at sending kindness to people we love, and it's much harder. We usually have more conflicted feelings about ourselves, so that's the more challenging part. But it turns out this self-kindness, self-acceptance part of mindfulness is really critical for its beneficial effects. So we're actually working right now to try to understand whether cultivating this attitude of self-kindness can also encourage greater understanding and compassion for others, testing this kindness is contagious idea, as Dan was talking about. So this is a study that Dan mentioned. It's actually being funded by the Kindness Institute and led by Janet Tomiyama in psychology. We're focusing on weight stigma. And the idea in this study is by changing our own attitudes about our bodies and weight, can that help us see other people with more kindness and compassion? So I want to also quickly distinguish between the self-compassion and self-kindness that's developed as a result of mindfulness practice and doing nice things for oneself. So there's actually a whole body of literature on acts of kindness interventions. So these are studies where you're assigned to do something nice for other people. And these are usually small acts like buying someone a cup of coffee, maybe making someone a meal. And often these studies also include a condition where people are asked to do kind things for themselves. Typically, these studies find that doing nice things for other people has small beneficial effects on well-being, but doing nice things for oneself does not. So we actually tested this idea out in a group of breast cancer survivors. And indeed, we found that women who were assigned to do kind acts for others reported feeling closer to their social networks and actually getting more support from those networks after the intervention. In contrast, those who did kind acts for themselves did not show these benefits. So I bring this up because It turns out when we were pilot testing this intervention, it's really hard to do nice things for yourself. It brings up a lot of feelings of guilt in contrast to doing nice things for others, which typically just make you feel good about yourself and about the other person. So I'm not giving up on the power of kindness to oneself. We all know the importance of self-care, particularly during stressful and challenging times. And we all know how difficult it is to actually make time and to take care of ourselves in meaningful ways. But I actually believe, based on some of our other studies, that self-kindness may be at the root of our ability to cultivate deep kindness and compassion for others. So I'm gonna now turn things over to our next presenter, Naomi Eisenberger.
Thank you, Julie. It's wonderful to be here and to get to share some of the work that we've been doing and discuss kindness. So I'm a social neuroscientist, and my work really focuses on understanding how the brain processes some of the intense emotional experiences that arise in our closest social relationships. Experiences like feeling close and connected to others, or feeling left out and rejected by others. And in a lot of ways, the kind of research that I've been doing has followed my own interests and development. So in my 20s, when I was a graduate student, I was very interested in questions like, why does rejection hurt? Since in young adulthood, we're all very focused on rejection or the possibility of rejection. And in this line of work, we found evidence that the brain seems to process rejection in a manner very similar to the way that it processes physical pain. So much so that we were also able to show that Tylenol, a physical painkiller, can actually reduce the painful feelings of social rejection as well. Later on, when I became a mom in my 30s, I turned my attention to the fulfilling experience associated with giving to others, kindness. So questions came to mind like, why do we engage in caregiving and altruistic behavior for others? Why can it feel so fulfilling? And what are the brain regions that are involved when we provide help or support to others? As well as what are some of the consequences of helping for the giver? And in this series of studies, we've shown sort of two main findings. First, we see that when people do kind things for others, whether it's donating to charity, trying to get money to help out a friend who could use some support, or soothing a loved one in pain, all of these pro-social actions activate basic reward-related circuits, the same kind of neural regions that are active when we do things like eat something tasty or drink alcohol. So we see that pro-social behavior is processed by the brain as an intensely rewarding experience, just like these other more basic rewards like food or drugs. The second thing that we've seen that's been a little bit more puzzling maybe, is that pro-social behavior has benefits not just for the receiver, which we would expect, but for the giver too. Specifically, the act of giving to others has some stress-reducing effects for the giver. So for example, we've done studies where we will randomly assign, so some of our subjects help someone else. The other half don't help someone else. And then we expose everyone to a stress task where they have to, give a speech and do mental arithmetic in front of an audience. What we find is that our subjects who were able to do something kind right before being stressed out, they actually show less of a physiological response to the stressor, less of an increase in heart rate and blood pressure. They just have a calmer looking physiology. We also find that if we do the reverse, if we start off by stressing subjects out and then allow them to help someone else right afterwards, this calms down their physiology more quickly than other types of rewarding experiences. Now, of course, one question that follows from this is, why in the world would this be? Why would helping others actually have a calming effect on the giver? And we think that the reason that giving to others might be stress reducing comes from the fact that kindness and other types of pro-social behavior rely on some of the same circuits, some of the same neural circuits that are dedicated to mammalian caregiving behavior. Mammalian, essentially parenting behavior, which is there in all mammals to help us tend to and care for offspring. And part of what this circuitry does is, in addition to motivating us to help care for our offspring, it also kind of turns down our own stress responses so that we can be better caregivers. So if you're a parent taking care of your offspring and you're faced with some kind of dangerous situation, you don't want to be running away and leaving your offspring stranded. You want to have the calmness and composure to run towards your offspring so that you can help and protect them from threat. And so we think that when people are engaged in different kinds of pro-social behavior like kindness to others, they may naturally activate this caregiving circuitry that we have as mammals, which then has this ability to turn down our own stress responses so that we can better deal with threats in the context of caregiving. So in some ways, this research shows that pro-social behavior seems to not only benefit others, but it seems to also improve our own well-being and our own physiological stress responding, which we think may ultimately have some longer-term positive health benefits. The last thing that I'll say is that while a lot of our research has been on hold for the past year because of COVID and not being able to run people in person, I do want to mention one consistent finding that we've been seeing in a lot of our online studies. So one of the other topics that I focus on is loneliness. Who's lonely? Has loneliness increased due to COVID? How do we best help people who are lonely? And what we've been seeing now over and over across multiple studies is one of the best ways to reduce loneliness is to actually go out and do something nice for someone else. This seems more helpful than doing something nice for yourself, as Julie was sort of implying, and more helpful than even thinking about others out there who really love you. There seems to be something to the act of helping others that reliably reduces loneliness. So I will end there and I will turn it over to Karen Umamoto.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I just want to kind of point out my Zoom background. There's been a lot of anti-Asian hate, as all of you know, and there's a campaign called LA versus Hate. And this is one of the Zoom backgrounds that they have as part of their website to try to promote more solidarity in the face of hate. So just wanted to promote that campaign. That also has to do with the work that I'm doing as a researcher at UCLA with the Kindness Institute and the center that I also affiliate with on juvenile justice reform. So kindness operates at many different levels, at the interpersonal level, but also at the systemic level. And people have been talking a lot more about systemic change. And one of the areas that I've been doing research and actual planning work in as an urban planner is the juvenile justice system in Hawaii. So I've been working for the past 10 years as a researcher that then brought me into doing work as an evaluator, as an implementation planner, as a facilitator, and as an advisor in the process of systems change in Hawaii. So the juvenile justice system in Hawaii is the closest to ending youth incarceration compared to any other state in the country. I think we're down to 2 girls and maybe a dozen boys in statewide in the correctional system. And this is a result of many, many years of work amongst all the different people that are involved in the juvenile justice system. And I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with people at the front end, from the police department all the way to the back end, which is a correctional facility. And I'm just going to present just some of the main takeaways from these 10 years of research that I've been, and action research that I've been involved in. So changing systems is actually a 3-pronged endeavor. And there are transformational processes that take place at 3 levels. And I call it the 3 Ps: paradigms, policies, and people. So as with any system or any branch of government, in this case, the juvenile justice system, and the criminal justice system, there's a logic that the whole system is kind of founded upon. And for the juvenile justice system, the whole idea of justice is based on the idea that if someone commits a harm, then they should pay restitution in some way. And most of the restitution is in the form of punishment. And that cognitive behavioral therapy kind of approaches are the most effective, are seen as the most effective, so that bad behavior is punished and good behavior is rewarded. An alternative logic that's led to the decrease in youth being eventually getting to the prisons is based on this idea that hurt people, right? Hurt people, people who are hurt other people. That it's not that people are born good or bad, that things happen to them actually, whether it's poverty or abuse or everything in between, that causes youth to behave in ways that are harmful to themselves or harmful to others. So that instead of punishment, the logical conclusion to that, the logical response would be to provide more therapeutic responses. So that goes into the second area of policies, that right now we have no place for apologies, for forgiveness, for reconciliation, or for healing. And that's one of the areas where a lot of reform activities are taking place to change things like mandatory sentences and to provide restorative justice options. And then the third domain is people. And this goes into the ethic of care that others have talked about today. There are two main streams of disciplines that feed into the juvenile justice system. Many come from criminology backgrounds and other people come from social work backgrounds. And you could see a big difference between the two. But even across the two, I think one of the things that people are talking more about is what would it look like if we were to treat every child in the system as if they were our own? And what would that look like? And what does it mean to get to the roots of the problems that they're confronting in life? So this has gotten to the idea of, for Hawaii, the metaphor of like an island society, or we often use the metaphor of a canoe, right? We're all living on a canoe or here on an island. And so people are related to one another, people are friends with one another. And so it's really a community situation. So it's not like if you put somebody in prison, they're gonna stay there forever and they're gonna come back and be your neighbor, especially in smaller communities. So what is it that what is it really gonna take, right, to work with the youth, work through the issues that they may be facing, work with the families that may be struggling, and to look at government as not so much as a monitor or source of surveillance and punishment, but as a source of support. And what kind of society would that look like? So this gets into a more systems approach towards looking at kindness and the things that we have to change because we don't live in necessarily a kind society and systems aren't necessarily kind institutions. So this is a more sociological approach to the issue of kindness that I think is just as important and really complements others at the individual level. So let me turn it over back to Dan, and I think we're looking forward to the discussion that we're all going to have together.
Thank you so much, Karen, and all the other panelists. Now I'm going to ask a few questions to all of the panelists, and then we'll also get into Q&A from the audience. If you do have questions, you can use the Q&A box below. So my first question is actually kind kind of going off of what Karen was just talking about, we're living in really tumultuous times. We're seeing a rise in racism and increased political divide. So how can we combat these challenges with kindness? And this is to anyone on the panel that wants to answer.
Well, I'll take a stab at starting it, and I'm sure my colleagues have many thoughts also. I think as you know, some of the information that's been shared today indicates, there are many different levels at which the problem needs to be tackled, from the level of the individual interacting with another to whole structural features of society. In terms of, you know, what each of us can do as an individual, I would say that we can act at all of those levels potentially, right? That the way that we treat people in our immediate social circle, whether those are your friends, neighbors, coworkers, people you interact with in, you know, in public or in a commercial context, but also the voices for change in terms of policies and structural features. You know, Karen's description just now of how it, you know, reform in the criminal justice system is possible when there is motivation by policymakers. And that, of course, where does that come from? That comes from the voices of their constituents. So I think there are many potential pathways.
Maybe I could just add one more thing. You know, change is really hard, and systemic change is really hard. And so I think there are different ways to make change. Some people advocate, you know, trying to make change from the inside out. Some people want to make change from, you know, pressure from the outside. But I think we really have to meet in the middle, you know, going both ways to work with systems to do that kind of education as scholars, to really share the research that we're doing and bring the wealth of research on kindness into these discussions about the kinds of systemic changes that are needed. I don't think we really do that. I think people think of kindness as something that's impossible to achieve at the institutional level, but I think there are ways that, and I've seen ways that this is implemented, but it's really a cultural shift, right? I think we see this in Hawaii partly because a lot of these initiatives are led by Native Hawaiians who are bringing indigenous ways of knowing right into these discussions and are basing these alternative programs on indigenous epistemologies. So I think there are things that we need to do in more inclusive ways to bring the wealth of wisdom together to make these changes.
I would just also, if I could just pick up on the metaphor that Karen mentioned, right? You know, the metaphor of being, you know, all together in a canoe, in a community. I think, you know, one thing that the pandemic has made clear is that in the 21st century, you know, all of planet Earth is connected, right? We can't isolate ourselves from one another. The actions of someone on the other side of the globe can affect you and vice versa. And conceptualizing ourselves as in a collective context changes, I think, the mindset of the individual and of the policymaker as well, right? That this pandemic will only be addressed ultimately by solving the problem on a global scale. It can't be addressed exclusively locally. And the same is true for lots of challenges like climate change that we're facing right now.
Great. So my next question, I think, is related in the sense that you all talked about how this needs to be studied at many different levels. It also needs to be studied by lots of different types of researchers. So can we talk about the role of interdisciplinarity and what opportunities and challenges you personally feel in your work related to trying to work with other disciplines?
I can say something about that. So for a long time, my work is interdisciplinary in terms of, you know, I was trained as a psychologist and then integrated neuroscience and integrated health outcomes and measures. So I think that having this interdisciplinary approach certainly expands the kinds of questions that we can look at in terms of how does kindness affect not only well-being, but how does it affect health. The other, I'm going to call this interdisciplinary. I'm not sure if it's a perfect fit, but another way that I like to think about these things is, thinking about kindness with different sub areas. So one of the questions I keep coming back to in my own work is this, it's going to sound very strange, but why is pro-social behavior not addictive? So I mentioned that in my work, we show, okay, well, doing kind things for others activates the same reward regions as drinking alcohol or winning money, these things that we can become addicted to, and yet it doesn't really feel like pro-social behavior works the same way. It doesn't feel like we become addicted to kindness. And so I've been starting to collaborate with an addiction researcher, which is a kind of interdisciplinary approach to try and figure this out. Why is it that we don't get the same kind of high with pro-social behavior that maybe we do with alcohol, or even getting likes on Facebook? What is the difference between those two experiences? And what does that mean for promoting kindness and pro-social behavior? So just a take on it.
Does anyone else have anything on that one?
I would just add very briefly, following up what I said in my introductory remarks. I mean, I consider myself, incredibly fortunate to be at UCLA and to, have the privilege of being part of the Kindness Institute, because it is really remarkable how much interdisciplinarity there is at UCLA in general. And if I were to go through like the research projects that the Kindness Institute is supporting right now, each of them, you would see this integration across a variety of disciplinary lines. And that's really unique. I'm not sure that members of the public necessarily understand, because scholarship is so specialized, right? We have hundreds and hundreds of years of scholarship in each particular field. It's very easy for academics to get stuck in little silos where we don't talk to people outside of our own perspective. And yet, of course, solving these, the world isn't divided up that way. So, solving these problems requires that kind of collaboration and communication. And it's just remarkable how well it is working at UCLA in general. And it's very rewarding to see our colleagues in the Kindness Institute working together.
Great. So I'm going to move on to some of the pre-submitted questions and then the audience member questions. So one that came up is, in what ways does the internet and electronic media create challenges or opportunities in our ability to be kind?
I'll say something. So I'm probably not the best person to answer this, because I am not on Twitter, because it scares the hell out of me, because it almost seems like online there, because of the anonymity, there's a greater meanness, less kindness towards others. You can sort of say whatever you want without worrying about how it's going to fall on the other person. Perhaps in line with my question about why isn't pro-social behavior addictive, I've wondered about, we have all these websites that we can go to where we can instantly buy something and make ourselves feel good. And these websites where we can instantly go and see where our friends are doing. I've always wondered, is there a way to think about creating some kind of website where we can instantly do something kind for other people? Maybe one that doesn't involve necessarily donating money. I don't know what this would look like. But it seems like, the internet can be used for kindness, but probably more often than not, it's not.
I just to quickly follow up, Naomi, and it was interesting. I was talking to a group of middle and high schoolers the other day, and they actually posed the same question you did, which is, why is it harder to do the nice thing and to do kind things and to be thinking about the good things in our lives? Why is that a harder muscle for some reason to work with? And I think we see those same things getting enacted online, because the easiest one that you're talking about is donating money, but it doesn't actually carry that same feeling of value. So I think, you know, those of us who are interested in intervention development are thinking a lot about, you know, how do we make these things habits, and how do we reinforce for people the positive things, so that that's what they're directing more of their attention and behavior towards, as opposed to the kind of so easily reinforcing negative things. And I think it's important to recognize that it does seem to be, for whatever reason, harder for people. And I was trying to frame an evolutionary perspective on that Dan can no doubt do a better job with than I can. But it really does suggest that there is work associated with it, and you have to establish systems and structures that help people along that path.
Right, and just to add on to that, we conducted this online study during COVID where, you know, we were paying people to answer a bunch of questionnaires, but we had also inserted this tiny little manipulation where some people were assigned to do kind things for others, like send them a kind text message, and other people were assigned to do kind things for themselves. And what we noticed while we were running this during coronavirus is that we had a lot of people dropping out of our kindness to others condition, because it was, I assume, just too effortful. They sort of, you know, they lost the payment too, but it was like they didn't want to put in the effort to do these kind things.
Just want to add, in the spirit of interdisciplinarity, we do have faculty at the Kindness Institute who study the internet and social media, and I think there are, from a structural point of view, algorithms and incentive structures that that help promote a more hateful speech than kind speech. So, but we do definitely need more research in that area.
Yeah, I totally second Karen's point. We have some of the world's experts actually on studying the way that the back end of the internet, the things that you don't see, actually shape your experience, and in so doing potentially not only reinforce but disseminate stereotypes and discrimination. Just speaking very briefly to Julie's point about our evolutionary history, and understanding Naomi's point about, you know, a kind of asymmetry here. Several things I think are really important. So I alluded to this in my remarks about our research, which is that our impressions of the world around us will then shape the way that we respond emotionally to events, and that will shape how we in turn act, that will then constitute a stimulus for someone else. And importantly, right, so our species is about 300,000 years old. You know, agriculture and domesticated animals are only 20,000 years old, and cities are only a few thousand years old. And cities on the scale of Los Angeles are, you know, the tiny blink of an eye in the history of humanity. So basically, you know, and then you add, you know, electronic media and internet technology, and that's just, you know, the fraction of a blink of the history of our species. Basically, our minds are not evolved to work well in this environment. They're evolved to work in small face-to-face communities, because that's what was characteristic of most of human history. And I think that has several implications. So one, Naomi alluded to the fact that anonymity promotes antisocial behavior, basically. This is a you know, very well-established pattern. It's easy to be anonymous online. And, you know, our species is both cooperative and competitive. Given the opportunity to you know, cut down potential rivals, you know, I think most of us would feel a temptation to do so, right? It's human to feel that temptation. At the same time, we experience electronic media as if it were in our own lives, as if it were right in front of us, right? So people who watch a lot of local news overestimate the probability that they'll be the victims of violent crime, right? Because if it bleeds, it leads on the local news. You know, we're mindful about what we eat. We're careful about our diets, right? But we need to be equally careful about our information diets, because it shapes our perceptions of the world around us. And lastly, as to why it's hard to be, you know, sort of kind and helpful at a distance. Well, think about, each of you, on the panel or the audience members, if you were walking down the street and there was an automobile accident right in front of you and someone was bleeding and injured, you would immediately, I think, be motivated to help. You wouldn't just stand there and do nothing as someone in dire need was right in front of you. And yet, of course, it's easy for all of us to refrain from being helpful when someone in need is far away, right? Right now, as we speak, there are people in need all over the world, right? That's because we have the psychology of a creature, that lived in small communities, right? That the people right in front of us were the ones that we helped and who helped us. And the people far away had no impact on our futures. So, the challenge of the internet is that things that are bad seem right in front of us, and opportunities to be good are often feel very distant. And the potential is there to make one-to-one connections of the kind that Naomi was describing, and to directly help people. I think this is, a challenge for the Kindness Institute to try and think about how we can realize that potential.
Great. So the next question is kind of multi-part, but it's all sort of related. Is kindness hereditary? Do people learn to be kind? Can kindness be taught? And then what is the role of parents, the educational system, religious organizations, etc., in teaching kindness?
Julie, you want to take a stab at the question of teaching kindness?
I can do the teaching part. I can't do the heredity part, but I'm sure there's research on it. Yeah, so as I was talking about, there's this field of social psychology, and Naomi's been involved in these studies as well, where they're almost like these little micro interventions. So it's like, do 3 kind acts for someone today. And you can have people engage in those interventions. They'll do them. They'll do them over a period of a couple of weeks, and typically you get little boosts in maybe your kind of well-being. Maybe, I mean, it's interesting the effects that you get when they did this in kids in school. Your status in school increased. No doubt because you were doing nice things for all the kids in your class, right? So the other kids are like, yeah, that kid's pretty nice. But how to then make those things more enduring, right? Like how to make that a habit, how to make that more the easy choice, the thing you really want to do. And again, this is something I think mindfulness takes a little bit of a different approach, where to some extent you're cultivating this in yourself, and does that then help you in a more sustained way be interacting with other people with more compassion, because you're feeling that for yourself. I mean, it's really makes me think of what Karen was talking about in their research. Like, you have to be thinking about yourself and about others differently. So perhaps it's not going to be kind of teaching people to do kind acts. Maybe it's going to be teaching people, or another approach is to teach people to be kinder to themselves. And is that contagious? I think that's an open question at this point.
And just to build on that a little bit, so I mentioned when I was talking about our research that we've seen that doing kind things for others can reduce loneliness, which sounds great. But we also know that when people are in these negative states, like lonely or distressed or depressed or whatever it is, they don't want to do kind acts. It's the people who are sort of feeling good that want to do the kind acts. So I think, like Julie's saying, there's one thing to teaching kindness, and then there's another thing to kind of starting from maybe the root of the action, which is sort of feeling good, feeling safe, feeling good about yourself.
Well, and I think, in the study that Naomi worked on, they found that this acts of kindness intervention works for people who are altruistic to begin with. Kind of what you were talking about, Dan. Like, if you go into it from a state of like, the world is good, we can all help each other, it feels so good to me to help other people. those are the people that it works for. Are those the people we should be targeting? What's going on with the other people who have the more kind of negative view, who are on that downward spiral? How do we pull them out of that?
Maybe I could just add one more thing about the role of kind of institutions and societal influences on youth. I mean, part of the reason why people are trying to reduce detaining youth even after arrest, or incarcerating youth, or using things like shackles or solitary confinement is that they find that those types of treatments actually induce more aggressive, negative, antisocial behavior. So I think we have to be, so it's kind of the flip side of it, right? The things that induce kindness, but the things that induce all the behaviors, right, that counter kindness. So I think it's we're trying to deal with things on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, I think, a critical thing really to understand in terms of these developmental processes is that, again, thinking about the history of humanity, right, that the idea of a kind of isolated nuclear family as a context for development is really not characteristic of the way people raise children, right? People are raised in a community by a community, and the information that that the developing mind processes is importantly horizontal as well as vertical or diagonal. That is, we learn from our peers, right? And you can just think for yourself about nursery rhymes and schoolyard games and things, which no adult ever taught a child. Another child taught that kid that, to the point even their origins are lost to the children, right? And historians discover their origins. So, I think certainly those of us who are parents, we all suffer from the illusion that we have this enormous influence on our children in terms of modeling behavior and directly communicating messages, right? This is, I recognize this in myself, this is an illusion. The science tells us that in fact, probably the most important thing that you can do as a parent is think about where, who the people that your child interacts with as they grow up, because it is that community context that provides the spirals of feedback of how your actions affect others and others' actions affect you, that shapes your expectations and your own behavior moving forward. And things like the juvenile justice system are kind of, a critical potential inflection point as to whether we try and reintegrate people who, as Karen said, are hurt, right? And thus they hurt others, right? Whether we try and bring them back into a community that will help them onto a positive trajectory where they're helping others instead of hurting, or whether we hurt them more, right? And in so doing, ensure that the feedback is negative rather than positive. They become less inclined with each passing day to be positive members of their community.
Great. So my next question is more practical in the sense that some of the audience members were wondering what they can do on a daily basis to enhance kindness in their daily lives, and how we can be more kind, given the fact of social distancing and the pandemic.
I mean, I think there are little things that can be done. So like I said, we had this virtual study during the pandemic where we had a condition where we asked people to do acts of kindness. And the examples that we gave them were literally just sending someone a kind text message. I know sometimes my son, who's 14 now, his teachers occasionally will have them do this assignment where they write a text message to someone to thank them for something. And he oftentimes sends it to me. And I know like my little heart melts in response to seeing these kind things from him. So I think just these little things that don't take very much time at all can actually make a really big difference for the receiver, but also probably for the person writing the text.
So Karen, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I know this sounds cheesy, but I've lived in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for 22 years and taught as a professor there, and I'm doing elder care now from Hawaii, working remotely. And one of the things that happens to me every time I come back, because I was born and raised in LA, product of LA public schools and everything, and there's just a different kind of sense about the society, right? And there's even a bodily change that I feel, right, when I come here. And I think there are places and societies and communities that are more nurturing than others. And I think part of it is to figure out how to create the beloved community, right? What does it mean to create beloved communities? And it could start with our families and friends and community groups that we're part of, to do things that are going to be useful to society. And I think the question of religion came in the chat. And I think religion is part of like the way that we see the world. It's part of our epistemology. It's part of our knowledge system. And I do think that that's why there's a lot of philanthropic work among the religious community, because I mean, I was raised by my grandmother, who was a minister of a Japanese church, but you know, even things, teachings like to give is to receive, right? To give is to receive. I mean, it's a way of, right? It's a way of thinking. It's a way that we're raised. And so just like a popular slogan here is to live aloha. What does it mean to live aloha? Aloha means I am of your breath, or to share breath. What does that mean, right? In our daily lives, in our daily interactions, and our outlook towards life. So I think part of it, you know, starts with us and our bringing our humanity right to the surface in its fullest expression. And then a lot of those things like text messaging, those things then flow naturally from that. So I think, and maybe just because I'm getting old and getting close to retirement age, that you know what I mean? You start getting philosophical about the way you live, the philosophy by which you want to live, and what that just means in your daily relationships and your commitment, right, to the broader community.
Karen, just out of curiosity, is that an explicit goal in Hawaii to become a beloved community? I think, you know, thinking about LA, I can't imagine anyone has that as an explicit goal, but I'm sort of wondering, is that something that people try to foster in Hawaii?
I think I think it's, there are people who promote that, right? Punani Burgess is one of my favorite people in Hawaii, and she always talks about the beloved community, and she has a whole training about the beloved community and all of the aspects, both internal and relational, right? That means that would entail. So I think it's something that's recognized, right? If you say that, you know, we really need to build a beloved community, there are many, many people who know exactly what that means, and also know that it's something that's in the process of formation all the time. There's no right and wrong, but it's to be of one's breath, right? That we live together, we breathe the same air, we share the same, you know, the same space, and I think it's clear in island communities, but I think it could be universal.
If I could, let me just follow up with a little anecdote that maybe makes this, brings it home. So I also had the privilege of living in Hawaii for a while, and one thing that, and raising a child there, and one thing that really was striking was the difference between the way Halloween is celebrated on the mainland and the way it's celebrated in Hawaii. So, you know, here in Los Angeles, Halloween is full of parents' concerns about bad actors in the world, right? That, you know, you can't have any unwrapped candy because Junior's going to get poisoned. In fact, there never has been a case of poisoning at Halloween. The FBI, you know, has investigated this extensively. It's an urban legend, but parents are convinced that their children, you know, on the mainland are in great peril. In Hawaii, you know, at Halloween, people set up now granted the weather's warmer, but still, people set up their beach chairs on the front lawn, and, you know, they celebrate the kids' costumes. They welcome the children, you know, not just their neighbors' children, but any kid. I mean, it was a great place for my daughter to be a kid, because she was constantly getting this, you know, incredible support from you know, adults and older peers all around her. Of just, it's a feeling of mutual support, right? And those are decisions that individuals are making, right? When you're saying to your child, no, you can't do that, you know, on Halloween, that would be dangerous, we need to watch out. You're communicating to your child, the world is full of bad people, right? And you should be cynical in your expectations of others' level of prosociality. versus when you are, welcoming strangers to your lawn and celebrating them, you're communicating to them the world is full of good people who have expectations that you will be pro-social in return. And lastly, in regard to the question of, the pandemic and what we can do, just to give you an example, right? And this is, I'm not holding myself up as exemplary. I learned this from other people, but I had a long conversation with somebody, in a support role who was helping, with a commercial transaction in the midst of the really bad pandemic. This person was answering phones somewhere in Texas, I don't know. And at the end of the conversation, I just said to her, thank you for being so helpful and for working so hard, in these difficult times during the pandemic. And she broke down and started crying. And she said, I've been doing this job for 10 years and no one has ever said that to me before, right? I think with a few words from me, I was starting to change her expectations of other people's level of pro-sociality. It doesn't have to be a huge investment. Each of our actions potentially affects other people.
Well, and I think that what you're bringing up too, Dan, is to have the intention for it and to actually act on it. Because I think for many of us, we're like, oh, that would be nice. So this is something I'm actually trying to do in my life with my kids' teachers, right? These poor people, and I empathize with them. Here they are pouring their hearts out on the Zoom screen to this just field of blank screen. So I'm emailing all of the teachers like, thank you so much. I love the way you're getting them to do X, Y, and Z. And it is a minimal act on my part. But as Naomi said, like on the receiver's end, that can be really powerful. And I think to be intentional about this for all of us, so we're creating that kind of community that Karen is talking about.
Well, I just want to thank the panelists so much, and I also want to thank the audience for submitting such amazing questions. We are out of time, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan for closing.
A heartfelt thank you to all of you, Stacy Freeman, Daniel Felsler, Julie Bauer, Naomi Eisenberger, and Karen Umamoto from the Bedari Kindness Institute. Hearing about kindness from many discipline perspectives provides a great example of UCLA's approach. We are grateful for your time and your ability to lead us through this informative discussion. Thank you. And thank you as well to the Women in Philanthropy members and other UCLA supporters with us today for participating in our webinar. A tremendous thank you to Melissa Delgadillo from the Development Events team and her team, Eduardo Ponte and Stella Plato, for helping us with the Zoom meeting logistics. And finally, the deepest appreciation is saved for last. Thank you to Melissa Efron-Hayek and Betty Montano of Women in Philanthropy for suggesting and pulling together this absorbing and enlightening program. We will be hosting additional webinars, so look for invitations to other interesting events from Women in Philanthropy. Have a good afternoon and evening and days to come, cultivating kind thoughts and performing kind actions to benefit our society. Good day.